The clinking of glasses stopped. Forks froze midair. Nello's mother stood and pointed across the crowded dinner table, her voice sharp enough to slice through the laughter. "Pay $2,000 rent or get out," she shouted, and the entire room fell silent. Every eye turned toward Nello, who sat stunned, her plate untouched. Her sister Saba smirked from across the table, twirling her diamond bracelet like a prize. Whispers rippled through the guests, some pitying, others judging. Nello's heart pounded, but not from shame. She folded her hands, raised her head, and whispered to herself, "If home means humiliation, then I'll build my own life from nothing." The music and laughter in the room suddenly stopped when Nello's mother stood up and pointed at her. In front of relatives and guests, she raised her voice and said that Nello had to start paying $2,000 rent or leave the house. Everyone turned to look at Nello as if she had done something wrong. Nello sat frozen, her heart heavy, not because of the money, but because her own parents chose to shame her in public. Her sister Saba, sitting across the table, smiled with pride, knowing she lived in the same house without paying a single cent. The difference in treatment was clear to everyone watching. Some whispered in pity, while others judged her in silence. For Nello, the pain went deeper than money. It was the betrayal of being singled out, as if she was less of a daughter. She wanted to ask why her sister was treated like royalty while she was treated like a burden, but the words stuck in her throat. In that moment, she realized the home she loved had turned into a stage for her humiliation. The wound was not about rent. It was about love, respect, and the cruelty of her own family. That night, when the guests finally left and the house grew quiet, Nello sat alone in her room. Her eyes moved across the walls that once carried her childhood memories, and for the first time, they felt empty. She thought about what had just happened, her own mother had humiliated her in front of everyone, and her sister had enjoyed the moment as if it was a victory. She wanted to scream, to ask why she was treated this way, but she knew her words would change nothing. So instead of arguing or begging, she chose silence. She stood up, opened her small suitcase, and began to fold her clothes one by one. There was no sound, no tears, just quiet strength. Every item she packed felt like she was closing a chapter of her life. She didn't take much, only the things she truly needed. A few clothes, her laptop, and a small box of old pictures that reminded her of the little girl who once believed this house was safe. As she zipped the bag, her heart beat faster. Not from fear but from a new kind of courage. She knew she had nothing waiting for her outside, no big plan, no comfort. But she also knew staying meant living under humiliation forever. She placed the suitcase by the door and looked around the room one last time. The posters, the books, the bed she had slept in for years. All of it no longer felt like hers. It belonged to a past where she thought family meant love. Tonight proved it meant conditions. She whispered to herself that walking away was not losing. It was choosing peace. Without saying a word to anyone, she carried her bag and stepped outside. The night air was cold, but it felt lighter than the walls she was leaving behind. She didn't slam the door. She didn't cry for someone to stop her. She simply walked away, her footsteps steady, her head held higher than it had been at the dinner table. She left behind not just the house, but the weight of being unwanted. And though she had no idea where her path would lead, she knew one thing for sure. She was done being the quiet victim. From this night on, her silence would not be weakness. It would be the beginning of her strength. Nello's new life started in a small apartment that was hardly bigger than her old bedroom. The walls were cracked, the paint was peeling, and there was only one tiny window that let in the morning light. The space had no bed, no furniture, not even a proper kitchen. All she had was her suitcase, a thin blanket, and her determination. She spread her blanket on the cold floor and used her bag as a pillow. That became her new bed. It wasn't comfortable, but it was hers. Every day felt like survival. She counted every coin before spending it, cutting out everything that wasn't necessary. She walked long distances to save bus money. She skipped meals so she could afford rent. Her dinner was often just bread and water. Yet she forced herself to smile because at least nobody could throw her out or shame her anymore. The silence in her little room was heavy, but it was also peaceful compared to the loud accusations of her parents' house. At night, she would sit on the floor with her laptop, the screen glowing in the dark. The internet became her only companion, her only chance to dream of something better. She learned how to live with almost nothing. She used plastic containers as dishes, stacked books as a table, and used her blanket both for sleeping and for warmth. It was a life of sacrifice, but she held on to the thought that this was temporary. Sometimes, she heard her neighbors laughing in the hallway, or the smell of someone cooking a real meal drifting through the walls. It made her heart ache, but instead of crying, she pushed herself harder. She reminded herself why she left, because she deserved dignity. Even if she was hungry, even if she was tired, she promised herself she would never go back to begging for love inside a house that treated her like a stranger. Her body grew thinner, her nights longer, but her mind became sharper. She learned how to stretch every dollar, how to live without comfort, how to keep moving forward even when everything felt impossible. Life on the edge was painful, but it was also shaping her into someone stronger than she ever knew she could be. And though no one saw it yet, inside that tiny one-room apartment, a new version of Nella was being built, one who would rise from the floor she slept on and one day own a place no one could take away from her. Nella's days began before the sun rose. She would leave her small apartment and head to her job at a local cafe. The pay was low, just enough to cover rent and a little food, but she never complained. She cleaned tables, washed dishes, and carried trays with a quiet determination. Every coin she earned was a piece of her survival. Customers often looked past her as if she didn't exist, but in her heart, she knew she wasn't meant to stay there forever. The cafe was not her dream, it was her stepping stone. After long hours on her feet, she would return to her tiny room, exhausted and hungry. But instead of collapsing into sleep, she opened her old laptop and pushed herself to learn something new. She had discovered digital design, and the moment she saw it, she knew it could change her life. Tutorials became her teachers, free online courses became her school. She practiced night after night, sometimes until her eyes burned and her hands ached from using the touchpad. Her floor became her desk, and her determination became her fuel. While others slept, she worked on simple designs, posters, logos, social media graphics. At first they looked rough, nothing close to professional, but she didn't stop. She kept practicing, correcting her mistakes, comparing her work to the best she could find. She treated every failure as a lesson and every small improvement as progress. There were nights she felt too tired to continue, but she would remind herself of the humiliation at the dinner table, of her mother's words, of Seba's mocking smile. That memory gave her strength when her body wanted to quit. She wasn't just learning for money. She was learning to build a life where no one could ever call her less again. Slowly, her efforts started to show. She joined small online platforms where beginners could offer their services. Her first job paid almost nothing, but it felt like gold to her. Seeing someone value her work gave her hope. She poured herself into every project, even the smallest ones, treating them as if they were her chance to prove herself. By day, she served coffee and wiped tables, but by night, she created designs that carried pieces of her heart. The cafe gave her bread, but design gave her a future. Every night she stayed awake, every new skill she learned was another step away from being the broken girl who left her parents' house. She was turning her struggle into strength, her silence into action, and her hunger into the fire that kept her going. Nella was no longer just surviving. She was learning the hustle that would one day change her life. Family gatherings became the hardest moments for Nella. She didn't want to go, but she also didn't want to give them another reason to say she was running away. Every time she entered the house, she felt eyes follow her, measuring her clothes, her shoes, her quiet presence. At the table, Seba always found a way to turn the spotlight on herself and throw a shadow on Nella. With her polished nails and glittering jewelry, Seba would lean back in her chair and laugh loudly about her trips to Paris, her shopping sprees in Dubai, or the expensive handbag she had just picked up because she felt like it. Everyone around the table would listen with admiration. And then Seba would look directly at Nella and add a sharp comment, just enough to sting. "Some of us are living," Seba would say with a smirk, "not just surviving in tiny apartments." The words always carried a fake sweetness, but the meaning was cruel. Relatives would chuckle nervously, pretending it was a harmless joke, but Nella knew it was meant to break her spirit. Sometimes Seba went further, asking her in front of everyone if she could even afford decent food, or if she still played with that old laptop all night. Each insult cut deep, But Nello refused to give Saba the satisfaction of seeing her broken. She sat quietly, eating little, speaking even less, while her heart tightened inside her chest. It hurt, of course it did, but she had learned something important. Silence could be powerful. Every word Saba threw at her, she stored like firewood, saving it to burn later as fuel. She knew that answering back would only make her look bitter in front of the family, and besides, she didn't need their approval anymore. She was building her own story quietly, piece by piece, while Saba wasted her energy on showing off. Sometimes, an aunt or uncle would try to defend Nello gently, saying, "Not everyone has to live the same way," but Saba would quickly dismiss them and steer the conversation back to her glittering life. Nello noticed how her parents always stayed silent too, never protecting her, never praising her efforts, just letting Saba's words hang in the air like truth. That silence from them hurt more than anything Saba could ever say. But Nello used it. Every insult reminded her why she left. Every laugh at her expense reminded her why she worked so hard. While Saba spent money without thinking, Nello was saving, investing her time, learning skills that would outlast handbags and trips. She understood that her sister's world looked rich, but it was shallow. Her own world looked poor, but it was strong. So she smiled faintly at the table, not in weakness, but in quiet promise to herself. One day, the same family that laughed at her small life would watch her walk in with something Saba could never buy: dignity, strength, and success earned with her own hands. One late night, while the city outside was asleep, Nello sat on the floor of her small apartment with her laptop open, working on yet another design. Her eyes were tired, but her heart refused to rest. She uploaded her latest project to an online platform, not expecting much. For weeks she had been doing small jobs, sometimes earning only a few dollars, but she kept going because she believed that one day her hard work would pay off. That night, without knowing it, her life was about to change. Somewhere far away, a foreign client searching for a designer came across Nello's work. They clicked on her portfolio and were surprised by the creativity and detail in her designs. Unlike many others, Nello's work carried emotion and effort. It showed the hunger of someone who wanted to prove herself. The client sent her a message, asking if she could handle a large project for their company. Nello read the words again and again, almost not believing they were real. She replied carefully, her hands shaking, promising she would give her very best. The contract details arrived the next day, and when she saw the payment, her eyes filled with tears. It was 3 times more than she had ever earned in a month. For the first time since leaving her parents' house, she felt the ground under her feet shift. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was finally breaking through. She poured her soul into the project. Days turned into nights, and nights into mornings, but she never complained. Each design she created felt like proof that she could rise above the humiliation, above the doubts, above the mocking words of her sister. When she finally submitted the finished work, the client's response was immediate. They were more than impressed. They called her a rare talent and promised to work with her again. The payment came into her account, and Nello stared at the numbers in disbelief. She remembered the nights of hunger, the bread and water dinners, the long hours of cafe work, and the insults at family gatherings. All of it suddenly felt worth it. Her sacrifice had not been wasted. It had led her to this moment. That night, she didn't sleep on the floor out of sadness but out of choice, smiling under her thin blanket. For the first time, she felt the weight of hope heavier than the weight of struggle. Her breakthrough had come quietly, but its impact was loud inside her heart. She knew this was only the beginning of something bigger, and she was ready for it. With the new contract money sitting in her account, Nello felt a rush of emotions she had never experienced before. For the first time in her life, she had more than just enough to survive. She could have easily gone shopping, bought new clothes, or moved into a bigger apartment. She could have shown her family that she was no longer the struggling girl they mocked. But Nello stopped herself. She remembered how her parents had lived, spending carelessly, showing off at parties, and pouring money into Saba's endless desires. That lifestyle looked beautiful from the outside, but she had seen how empty it was. She refused to repeat their mistakes. Every dollar she earned was carefully planned. She made a small budget for food and rent, and the rest went straight back into her future. She bought better design software, upgraded her laptop, and invested in online courses to sharpen her skills. Her tiny apartment remained the same, with its cracked walls and floor mattress, because she knew comfort could wait. For now, growth was more important than luxury. Sometimes she passed by shops with shiny clothes or watched her peers on social media showing off vacations, and a part of her wished she could do the same. But then she would remind herself why she started. She wasn't working to impress anyone. She was working to build a life no one could take away from her. Her sacrifices were not punishments. They were seeds she was planting for tomorrow. The discipline was not easy. There were nights she wanted to order a real meal instead of cooking the cheapest food she could find. There were mornings she wished she could sleep longer instead of rushing to both her cafe job and her design work. But she pushed through, telling herself that every small sacrifice today was a step toward freedom tomorrow. Her account slowly grew, not just from the foreign client but from new jobs that began to appear. Word of her talent spread quietly, and more people trusted her with their projects. She worked harder than ever, but she also saved smarter than anyone around her. While Seba showed off designer bags and luxury trips, Nello showed nothing. But inside her laptop and inside her bank account, real wealth was being built. Her greatest weapon was not money itself but the way she used it, with discipline, patience, and vision. She was no longer just surviving. She was preparing for something bigger. And though her family couldn't see it yet, her sacrifices were shaping her into a woman who would one day shock them all. Months passed, and while Nello quietly built her future with discipline, Seba lived louder than ever. Her social media was full of pictures from beaches, hotels, and luxury shops. At every family gathering, she arrived in new clothes and carried handbags that cost more than Nello's monthly rent. Everyone thought she was living a perfect life, but behind the glitter, cracks were beginning to show. Seba had no savings, no plan, and no real work to support her lifestyle. She depended on credit cards and her parents' money, believing it would never end. The first signs came quietly. A late bill here, a missed payment there. But Seba brushed them off, convinced she could handle it. She kept spending, throwing parties, and buying gifts to keep up her image. Soon, the creditors started calling, not just her but her parents as well. The phone rang day and night with demands for payment. Letters arrived, warning of overdue balances. At first, her parents defended her, saying it was just a small problem, but the debt grew bigger than they could hide. Neighbors began to notice. Relatives started whispering. The same people who once praised Seba's perfect life now raised eyebrows, questioning how long she could keep it up. Her mother, who once shouted at Nello for not paying rent, now sat worried as creditors knocked on their door. The pride she once carried in her voice turned into silence filled with fear. Seba, still desperate to maintain her image, borrowed more money to cover the old debts, but it was like pouring water into a basket. Nothing stayed. Luxury trips stopped. New handbags disappeared. The sparkle that once followed her dimmed as reality caught up. Relatives who once admired her now gossiped about the financial ruin spreading through the family. They spoke in hushed tones at gatherings, wondering how a house that once looked so proud could now be drowning in debt. Meanwhile, Nello stayed silent. She watched from a distance, not with joy at their downfall, but with a quiet understanding of how choices shape destiny. She remembered all the times Seba mocked her simple life, all the times she was shamed for living with less. Now it was clear who had built something real, and who had built only an image. The tables had begun to turn. Nello, who had once walked away with nothing but determination, was now standing on solid ground. Seba, who once mocked with diamonds and vacations, was losing everything she thought made her powerful. And the same family that once laughed at Nello was now forced to watch their pride crumble under the weight of Seba's reckless spending. The next family party felt different from the start. The air in the house was thick with whispers, not about Seba's luxury trips this time, but about the rumors of her family's financial troubles. Relatives spoke in low voices, exchanging stories about creditors and unpaid bills. Some said Seba's lifestyle had finally caught up with her. Others wondered if the family could recover from the shame. In the middle of all that noise, the door opened, and Nello walked in. But this was not the same Nello they remembered. She stepped inside wearing a simple yet elegant dress, her head high, her smile calm but full of confidence. Her presence alone turned heads. Relatives who once ignored her now stared, shocked at how much she had changed. She looked stronger, brighter, and more graceful than ever before. Seba, sitting near the front with less sparkle than usual, froze when she saw her sister. For the first time, she didn't have a new bag to flaunt or a vacation story to steal the attention. The gossip around the room grew louder. Some whispered, "Is that really Nello? She looks so different." Others nodded, wondering what had happened in the months since they last saw her. Nello didn't rush to explain. She greeted everyone politely, her calm energy making her stand out more than Seba's old showy ways ever had. Then, as the evening went on, Nello reached into her bag and pulled out a folded paper. She placed it gently on the table where everyone could see. It was the deed to her new home. Gasps filled the room as relatives leaned closer, reading her name printed clearly on the document. Nello had bought a house, something many of them never expected from the girl who once left with nothing but a suitcase. The same family that mocked her small apartment now had no choice but to acknowledge her strength. She didn't announce it with prideful words or loud bragging. She simply let the truth speak for itself. Her mother's face went pale, remembering the night she had told Nello to pay rent or get out. Her father shifted uncomfortably, unable to meet her eyes. And Seba, who once called her poor, sat frozen, her usual smirk gone, replaced by silent disbelief. Relatives began whispering again, but this time with admiration. She really did it, some said. She built her own life. The same people who once pitied her now looked at her with respect. Nello stood quietly, her hands folded, knowing she didn't need to say much. Her success was her answer to every insult, every doubt, every humiliation she had endured. That night, the unveiling was not just about a house. It was about dignity restored. Nello showed them that strength does not need to shout, it only needs to shine. When the time is right, the room was still buzzing with whispers when Nello finally rose to her feet. For so long, she had carried the weight of silence, enduring the insults, swallowing the pain, letting her actions speak louder than her words. But tonight felt different. Tonight, she had proof of what her sacrifice and strength had built. She looked around at the same faces that once pitied her, judged her, and laughed behind her back. Her mother's eyes were lowered, her father shifted in his chair, and Seba sat frozen, unable to hide her shame. Nello's voice was calm, steady, and clear as she spoke. "When you told me to pay $2,000 or leave, I thought I lost a family." She paused, letting her words settle in the silence. "But walking away gave me freedom." Her eyes moved slowly across the table, meeting every stare without fear. "I don't rent respect anymore, I own it." Her words struck harder than any insult ever thrown at her. The room fell completely silent. Not a whisper, not a laugh, not even the sound of movement. Relatives who once sided with Seba now sat in stunned respect, realizing that Nello had become the very example of strength and dignity. Her parents, who had chosen pride over compassion, couldn't find a single word to defend themselves. And Seba, who once believed she would always be the shining star, sat in the shadow of her sister's triumph. Nello didn't shout, she didn't cry, and she didn't need to prove anything more. She stood with quiet confidence, her success shining brighter than any luxury bag or vacation story Seba had ever boasted about. The deed to her house on the table spoke for itself, and her words sealed the moment forever. For the first time, the power in the room belonged to her. And as everyone sat in silence, she knew this wasn't just a victory over her family's cruelty, it was her declaration of self-worth. Nello had walked away with nothing but determination, and now she stood as living proof that dignity cannot be taken, only reclaimed. Her final stand was not just about answering her family, it was about answering herself. She had proven that leaving humiliation behind was the beginning of freedom, and she never had to beg for love or respect again. The silence that followed her words was not empty, it was the sound of undeniable triumph. Nello had won, and everyone knew it.